The old postman lived in a small mining town, nestled between gray hills and a river that no longer carried boats. His name was Marco. He had retired 7 years ago, but never stopped wearing the blue uniform with the worn-out silver buttons. Every morning at exactly 6:15, he left his small stone house near the old bakery and walked the same route through the cobbled streets. The town was called simply the Valley. He carried no official mail, because the postal service had closed its local office long ago. Instead, he carried handwritten letters, folded neatly into squares of yellowed paper. Each one was sealed with red wax that he melted himself over a candle flame. The townspeople had grown used to this routine over the years. No one asked questions anymore. When Marco knocked on a door, the person inside would open it slowly, take the envelope without a word, and close the door again. No greetings. No thank you. No curiosity about who had sent the letter, because everyone already knew the truth. The letters contained secrets. Not ordinary secrets, like who borrowed money or who argued with whom, but deeper things. Things that should have stayed buried. A woman learned that her husband had not died in the mine accident, but had left her willingly and started a new life across the border. A baker discovered that his recipe for sourdough had been stolen by his own apprentice, who now ran a shop 2 towns over. A young man found out that the child he thought was his sister was actually his daughter. Each letter carried a weight that could break a life, and yet, no one ever threw them away. Everyone kept them hidden under floorboards, inside hollowed books, behind loose bricks in the chimney. The letters were never discussed in public. The name of the sender was never spoken. Marco simply delivered and walked away, his face expressionless, his hands steady. As if he were carrying nothing more dangerous than a newspaper. The town had 412 residents, according to the last census, but only 32 people on the main street received the letters regularly. They formed a silent circle, bound by shame and fear and something else. Something that felt like gratitude. Because the letters never lied. Marco had never delivered a false accusation or a mistaken address. His information was always precise, always devastating, always true. How he obtained these secrets, no one knew. Some said he had worked for the secret police before the old government fell. Others believed he had a network of informants who traded gossip for protection. A few whispered that he simply watched and listened for decades, storing every fragment of information until the right moment came to use it. But the truth was stranger and darker, and no one in the valley wanted to face it. On a cold Tuesday morning in late autumn, Marco did not appear for his usual route. The streets remained empty. The doors stayed closed, because the residents had grown so dependent on his rhythm that they felt paralyzed without him. By noon, a neighbor noticed his front door slightly open. That had never happened before, because Marco was a man of precision and habit. The neighbor was a retired factory worker named Elena. She called out his name, but received no answer. She stepped inside and found the small house perfectly tidy. A kettle sat on the cold stove, and the red wax seal rested on the table next to an unused candle. But Marco was gone. His bed had not been slept in, his uniform was missing from the hook by the door. Elena searched the tiny kitchen, the cramped bedroom, the dark cellar, but found nothing, except a single sheet of blank paper on the dining table. The word tomorrow was written in Marco's careful handwriting. She took the paper to the town square, where a small crowd had gathered, because news traveled quickly in a place without phones or internet. Everyone agreed that something was wrong, but no one knew what to do. The town had no police station, no mayor, no priest. The church had closed years ago. The valley existed in a strange state of self-governance, where disputes were settled by silence and secrets were managed by the postman. With Marco gone, the entire system collapsed. At dusk, a child playing near the old fountain discovered Marco's leather mailbag hanging from a rusted iron post in the center of the square. The bag was old and cracked, with a broken strap, and inside, there were 32 envelopes. Exactly one for each resident on the main street. The envelopes were identical to the ones Marco always delivered, with the same yellowed paper and the same red wax seal. But there was a difference. Every single envelope was blank. No names. No addresses. No markings of any kind. The crowd gathered around as Elena carefully opened one of the envelopes and found nothing inside. She opened another, and another, each one empty. The paper was blank. The wax seal cracked easily, revealing only the smooth surface of folded paper, no words, no ink, no message at all. People began to murmur and shift uncomfortably, because the emptiness felt more threatening than any secret Marco had ever delivered. Then someone noticed that one envelope was different. It was addressed to the butcher, a large, silent man named Stefan, who lived above his shop at the end of the main street. The envelope had his name written in Marco's unmistakable handwriting, and the wax seal was darker red, almost brown, as if mixed with something else. Elena handed the envelope to Stefan. He stood motionless for a long moment, his heavy hands trembling slightly. He did not open the envelope in front of the crowd. Instead, he turned, walked back to his shop, and locked the door behind him. That night, the bell of the abandoned church at the edge of town rang 3 times. The sound was sharp and unexpected, because the church had no bell ringer, and the rope had been cut years ago. Yet the bell rang 3 short strokes at exactly midnight, and then fell silent again. No one went to investigate, because the night was cold and the road to the church was dark. Everyone in the valley had learned long ago that some questions were better left unasked. But the next morning, Stefan the butcher was gone. His shop was locked from the inside, with the keys still on the counter, and a single piece of meat sat rotting on the cutting board. The envelope addressed to him lay open on the floor. Inside, there was a small key made of black iron, and a piece of dirty string tied into a loose knot. No letter. No explanation. Just the key and the string. And somewhere in the distance, the bell of the abandoned church waited for someone brave enough to come and find out what the third ring meant. The town woke up to a gray sky and the smell of wet stone, because the river fog had crawled up from the valley floor, wrapping itself around every chimney and every rooftop. People stood in doorways and whispered about the butcher and the postman and the bell that had rung without a hand to pull it. Fear spread slowly, like cold water seeping through cracks in a wall. No one wanted to be the first to speak openly, but everyone understood that something had shifted. The rules of silence that had protected the town for years were now working against them, because without Marco, there was no one to manage the secrets, and without Stefan, there was no one to cut the meat for the weekly stew. A woman named Mira, who lived at number 12, decided to take action. She was not a detective or a leader, but she had a sharp mind and a habit of noticing small things that others overlooked. She walked to the butcher's shop and found the door unlocked, because someone had broken the lock during the night. Inside, everything was clean and orderly, except for the cutting board with the rotting meat and the empty envelope on the floor. She picked up the envelope and examined it carefully, noticing that the red wax seal had been cracked unevenly, as if opened in a hurry. The small black key and the piece of string were gone. She looked around the shop and found nothing else, except a calendar on the wall, with the days marked off in a steady rhythm until the last marked day, which was the Tuesday when Marco disappeared. Mira stepped outside and walked to the abandoned church at the edge of town. The building had been empty for 15 years, ever since the priest had left under mysterious circumstances that no one discussed. The wooden doors were warped, the windows were broken, and ivy had grown over the stone walls like green fingers climbing toward the roof. But the bell tower stood intact, and the bell itself hung silent above a floor of rotting wooden planks. Mira pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was cold and heavy, with the smell of damp stone and old incense. She walked carefully across the cracked floor toward the base of the bell tower, where a narrow spiral staircase led upward. The stairs were made of stone, worn smooth by decades of use, and she climbed slowly, her hand on the cold wall for balance. At the top, she found the bell chamber, with the large iron bell hanging from a wooden beam. The rope that had once been used to ring the bell lay coiled on the floor, cut cleanly at the end. But next to the coil, there was something unexpected. A small wooden box, no larger than a shoebox, painted black and secured with a simple latch. Mira opened the box and found inside a collection of items that made her breath catch in her throat. There were photographs, old and faded, showing the same group of people in different years, always in front of the church, always with the same expressionless faces. There was a notebook filled with dates and addresses, written in Marco's handwriting. Each entry was crossed out, except for the last one. That entry had a single word, Stefan. There was also a small leather pouch containing 3 keys, identical to the black iron key found in the envelope. And at the bottom of the box, wrapped in a piece of cloth, there was a photograph of 3 children standing in front of a carousel that had been dismantled years ago. The children were smiling, but someone had drawn red X's over 2 of their faces. The third child had a circle drawn around her head, with the name Elena written underneath. Mira felt a chill run down her spine. Elena was her neighbor, the retired factory worker who had found the blank paper on Marco's table. Mira had known Elena for 20 years, but she had never seen a photograph of Elena as a child. She had never heard Elena mention a carousel, or a church, or anything from before the town became what it was. Mira closed the box, tucked it under her arm, and descended the spiral staircase as fast as her legs would carry her. She needed to talk to Elena, but she also knew that direct questions would get her nowhere. In the valley, no one answered anything directly. Secrets were currency, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. Mira decided to visit the old fountain where the mailbag had been found. She arrived at midday, when the sun was hidden behind clouds and the square was empty except for a few stray dogs. She sat on the edge of the fountain and looked at the rusted iron post where the bag had hung. Someone had tied a piece of red string around the post, the same shade of red as Marco's wax seals. Mira untied the string and examined it. It was old and frayed, but it had been tied in a specific knot, the same loose knot that had been on the piece of string found inside Stefan's envelope. She realized that the string was not just a random object, it was a marker, a sign, a way of pointing towards something without saying it aloud. She followed the direction that the knot seemed to indicate, which was toward the old well behind the abandoned bakery. The well had been covered with wooden planks for years, and no one used it anymore. Mira removed the planks one by one, her hands scraping against the rough wood. She looked down into the darkness and saw something glinting at the bottom, about 15 feet below. She went to fetch a rope from her house, tied it to the iron post near the fountain, and lowered herself into the well. The walls were damp and cold, and the air smelled of earth and rust. When she reached the bottom, she found a metal box, similar to the one in the church but smaller. She opened it and found a collection of letters, not the sealed ones that Marco delivered, but drafts, written in pencil on scrap paper. Each draft was addressed to a different resident, and each one contained a secret. But there was something strange about the drafts. They were not written by Marco. The handwriting was different, more nervous, with letters that slanted to the left. And at the bottom of each draft, there was a small drawing of a carousel. Mira understood then that Marco was not the source of the secrets. He was only the messenger. Someone else had been feeding him the information for years. Someone who had access to the most intimate details of every life in the valley. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal everything. Mira climbed out of the well, covered in dirt and shaking from cold and fear. She walked to Elena's house and knocked on the door. Elena opened it slowly, her face unreadable. Mira handed her the photograph of the 3 children from the wooden box. Elena stared at it for a long time. Her hands did not tremble, but her eyes changed. They became older, colder, as if a mask had slipped. She stepped aside and let Mira enter. The house was dark, with curtains drawn and candles burning on every surface. On the table, there was a pile of yellowed paper and a pot of melted red wax. Elena sat down, picked up a pen, and began to write. She did not speak. Mira realized that Elena had been the one writing the drafts all along. Elena had been the source. And Marco had been her partner, her protector, her delivery system. But now Marco was gone. And Elena was still writing. Mira asked the question that had been forming in her mind since she found the box in the church. Why? Elena did not answer with words. Instead, she pointed to the photograph of the 3 children. She pointed to the circle around her own young face. Then she pointed to the red X over the face of a boy. Then she pointed to the other X, over the face of another girl. And finally, she pointed to the carousel in the background, a carousel that had been dismantled the same year that the priest had left the church. The same year that the town had stopped speaking to itself. The same year that the secrets began to flow like water through a broken dam. Mira understood enough to be terrified, but not enough to know what would happen next. She left Elena's house as the sun set, carrying the photograph in her pocket. Behind her, the bell of the abandoned church rang once. A single stroke, long and low, like a groan from the earth itself. Then silence. The days that followed were strange and heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm that never arrives. Marco did not return. Stefan the butcher did not return. But the letters did not stop appearing. Every morning, residents found new envelopes slipped under their doors, sealed with red wax and filled with secrets that cut to the bone. The difference was that now the letters had no sender and no postman. They simply appeared, as if the town itself had learned to speak. Mira watched from her window as people read their letters and reacted in silence. Some cried. Some packed bags and left on the midday train that passed through the valley once per day. Some locked themselves in their houses and did not come out for days. The fabric of the community, already thin and fragile, began to tear apart completely. Neighbors who had lived side by side for 40 years stopped speaking. Shops closed. The school, which had only 7 students, shut its doors because the teacher received a letter about her husband and fled to the city. Mira tried to talk to Elena again, but Elena's house was locked and dark, the curtains were drawn, and no one answered the door. Mira looked through the window and saw that the candles were still burning, but Elena was not there. The pile of yellowed paper on the table had grown larger, and the pot of red wax was still warm. But Elena had vanished, just like Marco and Stefan before her. Mira decided to search the abandoned church one more time. She brought a lantern and a small knife, not because she expected violence, but because she wanted to feel prepared. The church was darker than before, as if the walls had absorbed the absence of light. She climbed the spiral staircase to the bell chamber and found the wooden box still there, but empty. Someone had removed the photographs and the notebook and the leather pouch. She looked around and noticed something she had missed before. There was a second staircase, hidden behind a wooden panel, leading further up into the bell tower. She had not seen it on her first visit because the panel was painted the same color as the stone wall. She pushed it open and climbed. The stairs were narrower and steeper, and the air grew colder with each step. At the top, she found a small room, no larger than a closet, with a single window that looked out over the entire town. In the center of the room, there was a chair, and in the chair, there was a body. It was the priest. The priest who had left 15 years ago. Except he had never left. He had been sitting in this room, in this chair, for 15 years. His clothes were faded and dusty, and his skin was stretched thin over his bones like old paper. But his eyes were open, and they were watching. Mira stumbled backward, her hand over her mouth. The priest was not dead, he was barely alive, kept breathing by something that looked like willpower and hatred and nothing else. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Mira leaned closer and saw that his tongue was missing. Someone had cut it out long ago. On his lap, there was a stack of letters, not drafts, but finished envelopes, sealed with red wax and addressed to every resident of the main street. Including one for Mira. Including one for Elena. Including one for Stefan. And including one for Marco. The envelope addressed to Marco was already open. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in the priest's trembling handwriting, "I know everything." Mira understood then. The priest had been the original source of the secrets. He had heard every confession, every whisper, every guilty thought spoken in the dark of the church for decades. He had stored them all, like poison in a bottle, waiting for the right moment to release them. But someone had silenced him. Someone had cut out his tongue and locked him in this room, and then taken his secrets and used them for their own purpose. That someone was Elena. And Marco had been her accomplice, delivering the letters while the priest rotted in the tower. But then something had gone wrong. Marco had disappeared, and Stefan had disappeared, and Elena had disappeared. Because the priest, even without a tongue, had found a way to ring the bell. 3 strokes. A signal. A warning. Mira looked at the envelope addressed to her. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, there was a single sentence, written in the priest's hand, "You are the daughter of the woman who killed the girl on the carousel." Mira did not understand. She had never ridden a carousel. She had never killed anyone. But the words burned in her mind like a brand. She thought of the photograph of the 3 children, with the red X's over 2 faces. She thought of Elena's young face circled in the photograph. She thought of the carousel that had been dismantled. And she realized that the priest was not giving her a secret about something she had done. He was giving her a secret about something that had been done to her. She was the daughter of one of the children in the photograph. The girl with the X over her face. That girl had died on the carousel many years ago. And Elena had been there. Elena had seen it happen. Elena had done nothing to stop it. Mira walked down from the tower, past the bell chamber, down the spiral staircase, through the cold church, and out into the gray afternoon. She walked to Elena's house, but this time she did not knock. She broke the door open with her shoulder. The candles were still burning, but Elena was gone. On the table, there was one final letter, addressed to Mira. The wax seal was fresh. Mira opened it. Inside, there was no sentence, no secret, no accusation. There was only a small key, identical to the black iron key that had been found in Stefan's envelope. And a piece of string, tied in the same loose knot. Mira looked at the key and the string for a long time. Then she understood. The key did not open a door or a lock or a box. It opened a memory. And the string was not a marker or a sign. It was a connection. A connection between the living and the dead. Between the ones who spoke and the ones who were silenced. Between the priest in the tower and the woman who had put him there. Mira walked to the old well behind the abandoned bakery. She tied the string to the key and lowered it into the darkness. Then she walked away. She did not look back. She left the town that same night, on the midnight train, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the photograph of 3 children in her pocket. Behind her, the bell of the abandoned church rang 3 times. But no one was there to hear it. The town of the valley continued to exist, but it no longer had secrets, because secrets require someone to keep them, and everyone who had ever kept a secret in that place was gone. Marco never returned. Stefan never returned. Elena never returned. And the priest, who had known everything, finally closed his eyes and stopped breathing. The church bell never rang again. The letters stopped appearing. And the town, slowly, began to forget. But Mira never forgot. She carried the photograph with her wherever she went, and every night she looked at the faces of the 3 children, the 2 with the red X's, and the one with the circle around her head. She knew that Elena had not been evil. She had been broken. Just like the postman. Just like the butcher. Just like the priest. Just like everyone in the valley. The only difference was that some people break in silence, and others break in ways that destroy everything around them. Mira chose to break differently. She chose to leave. And that was the end of the story. No resolution. No justice. No tidy ending. Just the cold truth that some mysteries are never solved, and some secrets are better left buried in the dark, at the bottom of an old well, tied with a piece of string to a key that opens nothing at all.